When a boy ages out of the system at 18, he inherits a worthless junkyard from the grandfather he never knew. What he discovered inside wasn't just about scrap metal. It was about a secret that would redefine his entire life. If you've ever felt written off or underestimated, this story is for you. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're building a community here for people who know what it's like to fight for a second chance. The day I turned 18 was the day I became homeless. It sounds dramatic, but it was a quiet, administrative kind of homelessness. There was a form, a signature, and a cardboard box containing 2 changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, and a toothbrush. The group home director, Mr. Albright, shook my hand with the same detached efficiency he used to sign off on grocery requisitions. His knuckles were cold. "Good luck, Leo," he said, his eyes already drifting toward the next task on his list. For 2 years, this place had been my entire world. 2 years of beige walls, scheduled meals, and the constant low hum of other people's managed misery. It wasn't a home, but it was a roof. Now, the roof was gone. I stood on the cracked concrete steps, the flimsy box in my arms, and watched the heavy metal door click shut behind me. The sound was so final. It was the sound of a period at the end of a sentence I didn't know how to finish. The air tasted different out here. It was thick with car exhaust and the smell of rain on hot asphalt, a chaotic perfume of freedom I had no idea what to do with. For a moment, I just stood there, a ghost haunting the edge of my own past. People on the sidewalk flowed around me like a river around a stone, each with a destination, a purpose. I had neither. My only plan, if you could call it that, was a meeting. A meeting arranged by a social worker in the final, frantic week of my state-sponsored childhood. My stepmother, Diana. I hadn't seen her since my father's funeral 6 years ago. She was a brief, sharp-angled presence in my life, a woman who had married my dad a year before the accident and had looked at me with a kind of polite confusion, as if I were a piece of furniture left behind by a previous tenant. After he died, she had signed the papers, the ones that sent me into the system. It was, she had explained to a social worker over the phone, the most stable and responsible solution. I had the address of a coffee shop downtown, a place with minimalist decor and overpriced lattes. It felt like her kind of place. I used the last of the cash the home had given me, a crisp $20 bill that felt like a fortune and nothing at all, to take a bus. The city blurred past the window, a smear of brick and glass. Every building seemed to hold a life I couldn't access, a warmth I couldn't feel. I felt profoundly and completely alone, a feeling so vast and deep it was like drowning in thin air. The bus sighed to a halt, and I stepped out into the heart of a world that didn't know I existed. The coffee shop was exactly as I'd pictured it, clean, white, and sterile. Diana was sitting at a small table by the window, stirring a drink that was mostly foam. She looked the same. Her hair was a perfect, immovable helmet of blonde. Her suit was sharp and gray, the color of a winter sky. She didn't stand up when I approached. She just gestured to the chair opposite her with a manicured hand. "Leo," she said. It wasn't a question or a greeting. It was a label. "You're late." I wasn't, but I didn't say anything. I just sat down, placing my box on the floor beside me. It felt pathetic and small next to her expensive leather briefcase. "Do you want something?" she asked, nodding toward the counter. I shook my head. My stomach was a tight knot of nerves. I just wanted this to be over. "Fine," she said, taking a delicate sip of her foam. "Let's get to it. I'm a busy woman." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a large manila envelope. She slid it across the table. It made a dry, scraping sound. "As you know, your father left nothing. Debts, mostly. However, there was a small residual matter from your grandfather on your father's side. Arthur. I believe you met him once or twice as a child." I had a vague memory, a whisper of a man with hands that smelled like oil and earth, a booming laugh that seemed to shake the room. He'd given me a small, carved wooden bird. My father had thrown it away, calling it a piece of junk. "Your grandfather passed away about a year ago," Diana continued, her voice devoid of any emotion. "His will was complicated. He was an eccentric man, a hoarder, to be frank. He lived in the middle of nowhere. But his final testament stipulated that his sole asset be held in trust for you until your 18th birthday. Today." She tapped the envelope. "This is it." I looked at the envelope, then at her. I didn't understand. An asset? An inheritance? The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. Hope, a stupid and fragile thing, began to flutter in my chest. Maybe this was it. A lifeline. A second chance. "What is it?" I asked, my voice raspy. She gave me a look that was a cocktail of pity and contempt. "It's a piece of land, out in a town called Black Creek. It's a junkyard, Leo. That's the only way to describe it. 5 acres of scrap metal, rusted-out cars, and his derelict trailer. The county has liens against it for code violations. It's worthless. In fact, it's less than worthless. It would cost a fortune to clean up." She pushed the envelope closer. "Inside is the deed, the key to the gate, and a letter from the estate's lawyer officially transferring ownership to you. It's all yours. The debt, the mess, all of it." The fragile hope in my chest shattered. Of course it was a joke. A cruel punchline to a long, unfunny story. She was kicking me out, not just from her life, but from any possibility of a future, saddling me with a burden disguised as a gift. "There is, however, a small opportunity," she said, leaning forward slightly. Her tone shifted, becoming conspiratorial. "A development group has been trying to acquire land in that area for years. They're planning a new logistics hub. They've made a standing offer for the parcel. It's not much, given the cleanup costs they'd have to incur, but it's something. $5,000. $5,000. It sounded like $1 million. It sounded like a new start. A security deposit on an apartment. A few months of not having to worry about where I would sleep. "The offer is on the table," she said. "The developer's contact information is in there. My advice? Call them. Take the money and run. It's the only smart move. Get yourself a small room somewhere and try to make a life." She stood up, smoothing down her already perfect suit. The meeting was over. "I've done my duty, Leo. The rest is up to you." She didn't look at me again. She walked out of the coffee shop and disappeared into the stream of busy, important people. I was left alone at the table with the cooling ghost of her coffee and the heavy manila envelope. I sat there for a long time, the sounds of the cafe fading into a dull roar. A worthless junkyard, a mountain of debt, and a $5,000 escape hatch. It was a choice, I guess, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a trap. After a while, I picked up the envelope. It was surprisingly heavy. I didn't open it, not yet. I just held it, feeling the weight of it in my hands, the weight of my past, and the terrifying empty space of my future. I put the envelope in my box, picked it up, and walked out of the sterile white coffee shop, back into the gray, indifferent city. I had a deed to a place I'd never seen, a key to a gate I couldn't picture, and a choice that felt like no choice at all. I spent that night at a bus station. The plastic seats were molded for discomfort, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and despair. I sat with my box on my lap, the manila envelope a hard rectangle against my ribs. Sleep was impossible. Every time I drifted off, the image of Diana's pitying smile would jolt me awake. A worthless junkyard. The words echoed in the vast, echoing terminal. I watched the departures board, the names of cities scrolling past like forgotten promises. Albany, Richmond, Cleveland, places that meant nothing to me. But one destination, a late-night departure, caught my eye. A local line, the kind that did a milk run through a dozen small towns I'd never heard of. One of them was Oak Haven, a town the route map showed was only 10 miles from a place called Black Creek. It felt like a sign. A stupid, desperate sign, but the only one I had. I didn't have a phone to call the developer. I didn't have a bank account to deposit the money in. All I had was a piece of paper that said I owned a piece of dirt somewhere. Maybe I had to see it. Maybe I had to stand on that worthless patch of ground and see the mess for myself before I could sign it away. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a journey to the heart of my own misfortune. I walked to the ticket counter, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The woman behind the glass looked tired. I pushed a few of my remaining dollars through the slot. "One way to Oak Haven," I said. She didn't look up. She just printed the ticket and slid it back. My hand was shaking slightly as I took it. This was it. I was leaving the only city I'd ever known, for a place that existed only as a name on a map and a dismissive sneer from my stepmother. The bus was old, the seats covered in a scratchy, patterned fabric that had seen decades of weary travelers. I found a seat by a window that was clouded with grime. As the bus pulled out of the station, its engine groaning in protest, I finally opened the envelope. Inside, just as Diana had said, was a thick, legal-looking document with my name on it. Leo Vance. There was a letter from a law firm, a single, rust-pitted key on a simple metal ring, and a business card for a company called Apex Land Holdings. There was no personal note from Diana. No good luck or sorry for your loss. Just the cold, hard facts of my inheritance. I tucked the business card away. I wasn't ready to make that call yet. I held the key in my palm. It was heavy, old-fashioned, the kind of key that opened a lock built to last. I closed my hand around it, the metal cool against my skin. The bus rumbled through the sleeping city, past darkened storefronts and empty parks. Then came the suburbs, rows of identical houses with perfectly manicured lawns, each a tiny kingdom of normalcy I had only ever seen from the outside. And then, slowly, the lights grew farther apart. The houses gave way to fields, dark and vast under a moonless sky. The world outside the window dissolved into an abstract landscape of shadow and fleeting shapes. I leaned my head against the cool glass, the vibrations of the road traveling up through my bones. I thought about my grandfather, Arthur, the man with hands that smelled like oil. Diana had called him a hoarder, an eccentric. My father had called him a failure, a man who wasted his life tinkering with junk. But as I sat on that bus, hurtling toward the legacy he'd left me, I wondered, what if they were wrong? What if a man who keeps everything is just a man who can't bear to lose anything? The other passengers were a quiet, solitary bunch. An elderly woman knitting a scarf of impossible length. A young soldier in uniform, staring blankly ahead. A mother trying to hush a restless child. We were all running from something, or to something. Or maybe, like me, we were just running. I fell into a fitful sleep, the bus rocking me like a cradle. I dreamt of rusted metal towers and fields of broken glass. I dreamt of my grandfather's booming laugh, but I couldn't see his face. It was always just out of frame. I woke when the bus jolted to a stop. The morning light was a pale, watery gray. Outside the window, a small sign read, Oakhaven. The driver called out the name in a bored monotone. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away with a hiss of its air brakes, leaving me in a profound silence. The town, if you could call it that, was little more than a crossroads. A gas station with a flickering sign, a diner with faded red booths visible through the window, and a handful of houses with peeling paint. The air was clean and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. It was so different from the city's smoggy breath that it felt like I was on a different planet. I checked the map I'd found online before leaving. Black Creek wasn't a town. It was just a name for the rural area a few miles down the road. My property was on something called Crow's End Lane. There were no more buses, no taxis. There was just the road, stretching out into the rolling green hills. So I started walking. The box was awkward and heavy, but I held onto it. It was everything I owned. The walk was long. A couple of pickup trucks rattled past, the drivers giving me curious, sidelong glances. A boy with a box on the side of a country road was an anomaly here. I felt like an alien. After what felt like hours, I saw a rusted, hand-painted sign half hidden in overgrown weeds. Crow's End Lane. It was a dirt road, more of a track, really, carved between dense walls of trees. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. This was it. I followed the track, the mud squelching under my worn-out sneakers. The trees formed a canopy overhead, plunging the lane into a gloomy twilight. And then the woods opened up, and I saw it. A fence. A very tall, very serious chain-link fence, topped with curls of barbed wire. It stretched as far as I could see in either direction, enclosing a vast, chaotic territory. And in the center of the fence was a gate, a massive sliding thing made of corrugated steel, secured with a heavy chain and a formidable lock. This was my inheritance. Diana hadn't been exaggerating. Through the links of the fence, I could see a landscape of pure chaos. Mounds of scrap metal rose like small mountains. Skeletons of cars were stacked one on top of the other, their empty windows like hollow eyes. There were piles of tires, forests of pipes, and everywhere the creeping green of weeds and vines, slowly reclaiming everything. It was a monument to decay. It was overwhelming. My heart sank. She was right. It was worthless. Worse than worthless. It was a 5-acre cage of rust and ruin. I wanted to turn around, walk the 10 miles back to Oakhaven, find a payphone, and call the developer. Take the $5,000 and never look back. But something stopped me, a flicker of stubbornness, a refusal to be beaten so easily. This was the last piece of my family I had left, a broken, ugly piece, but mine. I walked to the gate. The lock was old and weathered, a deep orange with rust. I took the key from my pocket. My hand was steady now. I slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, stiff from years of disuse. I put my other hand on it and turned with all my strength. There was a loud, grating click. The sound echoed in the quiet air. The lock sprang open. I unwound the heavy chain, the links cold and gritty in my hands. With a groan of protest, I slid the heavy gate open just enough to slip through. I stepped inside, and a gust of wind blew the gate shut behind me with a deafening clang. I was in. I was standing on my own land. The air inside the fence was different. It was still and silent, except for the whisper of the wind through the skeletal remains of 100 different lives. It smelled of rust, oil, and wild growing things. It didn't smell like decay. It smelled like memory. In the center of the yard, nestled between a mountain of what looked like old engine blocks and a row of headless tractors, was a trailer. It was a long silver airstream, the kind you see in old movies, but it was tarnished and dull, streaked with years of grime. A single bare light bulb hung over the door. This must have been where he lived. This was his home. I started walking toward it, my feet crunching on a ground made of gravel and dirt and tiny, forgotten fragments of metal. This wasn't just a junkyard. It was a library of forgotten objects. Each rusted car, each broken machine had a story. A story of a life it had served, a purpose it had fulfilled before ending up here. It was a strange and melancholy kingdom. And for the first time since leaving the group home, I didn't feel entirely alone. I was surrounded by ghosts, but they were quiet, unassuming ghosts. They didn't judge. They just were. It was a mess. It was a disaster. But it was my disaster. The trailer door was unlocked. I pulled the handle, and it opened with a long, low creak, like a sigh. The air that wafted out was stale and musty, the smell of a place that had been sealed for a long time. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight that pierced the gloom from a grimy window. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting slowly to the darkness. It was cramped, but surprisingly orderly. Not the chaotic horde I'd expected. It was the living space of a man who lived a deliberate life, even if that life was lived amidst a sea of scrap. On one side was a narrow cot, the blanket folded with military precision. On the other, a small kitchenette, the counters wiped clean. But the majority of the space was taken up by bookshelves. Bookshelves made from cinder blocks and planks of wood, sagging under the weight of hundreds of books. Manuals for engines, treatises on metallurgy, histories of industrial design, poetry collections, worn paperback novels. This was not the library of a simple hoarder. This was the library of a scholar of things. In the center of the small room was a large, sturdy wooden desk. It was clear of clutter, except for a single, old-fashioned rotary phone and a tarnished brass lamp. It looked like he had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any minute. The feeling was so strong, it made the hair on my arms stand up. I ran a hand over the surface of the desk, a fine layer of dust coming away on my fingertips. It felt like an altar. I tried the drawers. The top two slid open smoothly. They were filled with neatly organized tools. Calipers, small screwdrivers, drafting pencils. The bottom drawer, the large one on the right, was locked. I jiggled the handle, but it was solid. There was no key on the ring I had, just the one for the gate. A flicker of that same stubbornness returned. I went back outside and rummaged through a pile of what looked like old construction tools. I found a long, flat pry bar, its end worn and sharpened. It felt heavy and capable in my hand. Back in the trailer, I wedged the end of the pry bar into the thin gap above the locked drawer. I put my weight into it. The wood groaned. I leaned harder, my muscles straining. There was a sharp crack, and the lock splintered. The drawer popped open an inch. I pulled it open the rest of the way. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I don't know what I expected to find. Money? A weapon? Another cruel joke? It was none of those things. The drawer was almost empty. It held only a single object, a thick, cream-colored envelope, heavy with what felt like many pages. On the front, written in a strong, slightly slanted hand, was my name. Leo. Just Leo. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was something he had left for me. Something Diana didn't know about. Something just for me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper was old and soft, the ink a faded blue. It felt like a sacred object. I sat down in the dusty chair at the desk, the chair where my grandfather must have sat 1,000 times. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and paper and time. And I carefully broke the wax seal, a simple, unadorned circle of dark blue, and pulled out the letter. It was many pages long, covered in that same strong, steady script. I unfolded the first page and began to read. "My dear Leo," it began. The words felt like a voice in the silent trailer, a voice I almost remembered. "If you are reading this, then it means I am gone, and you are 18. It means the world has finally cast you out on your own, and some lawyer has given you the key to this mess. I am sorry for that. I am sorry for so much. I am sorry I was not there to see you grow. I am sorry you have known so much loss. Please, do not believe what they have told you about me. Do not believe what your father or his wife may have said. The story is more complicated than that." I had to stop and take a breath. My eyes were burning. I could hear his voice in the words, a low, rumbling sound, full of a sadness that mirrored my own. I read on. "When your parents died, I tried to take you. I wanted to. You were my grandson, the only piece of my son I had left. But I couldn't. Your father, bless his ambitious and foolish heart, had gotten himself into trouble. Deep trouble. Not just with banks, but with dangerous people. He owed them a great deal of money. When he died, they didn't just go away. They came looking for assets. Anything they could seize. Your stepmother, Diana, was smart enough to declare his estate bankrupt and hand you over to the state. It was a cold move, but it put you beyond their reach in a legal sense. You became a ward of the system, untouchable. The pieces were starting to shift, forming a new and terrifying picture. The story I'd been told, the simple narrative of abandonment, was beginning to crack. They knew about me, the letter continued. They knew your father was my only son. They assumed I had money, that I would be your guardian, and that they could then lean on me, on you, to collect their debt. So I had to make a choice. I could fight for custody, bring you here, and in doing so, bring a world of danger and threat to your doorstep. Or I could disappear. I could become a ghost, a poor, eccentric old recluse with nothing to his name but a pile of junk. I chose to protect you, Leo. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I cut off all contact. I let the world, and you, believe I didn't care. I built this fence, not to keep people out, but to keep my world in. To look like a paranoid old man. I let the county file liens for code violations I could have easily paid. all to create a paper trail of poverty. It was all a performance, a long, lonely performance to keep you safe until you were a legal adult, free from your father's debts, free from their reach. I dropped the letter onto the desk. My hands were shaking too much to hold it. I stood up and paced the small, cramped space of the trailer. A sob escaped my throat, a raw, ragged sound. I cried. I cried for the little boy who thought his grandfather didn't want him. I cried for the teenager who had felt so utterly alone in the world. And I cried for the old man who had lived out his last years in solitary confinement, surrounded by junk, all to protect a grandson he couldn't know. It wasn't abandonment. It was a shield. The fence, the rust, the deliberate poverty. It was all a fortress built to protect me. The weight of his sacrifice was crushing. It was a love so fierce and so total that it had disguised itself as its opposite. I sank back into the chair, my body trembling. The world had been tilted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew was wrong. Diana hadn't just been cold. She'd been an unwitting part of a lie, or perhaps a willing one. The $5,000 offer wasn't a lifeline. It was a vulture's bid for the carcass of a story it didn't understand. After a long time, my tears subsided, leaving behind a hollow, echoing calm. I picked up the letter again. There was more. "This place," the letter went on, "is not what it seems. Your father saw it as a testament to my failure. Diana sees it as a liability. They are both wrong. This is not a junkyard, Leo. It is a collection. For 50 years, I have been saving things. Not just any things, the right things. Things the world threw away, but which have a value the world has forgotten. There is a logic to the chaos, a system, and there is more here than just scrap. I have saved for you not just this land, but a chance, a real one. But you will have to work for it. You will have to trust me." My eyes scanned the lines, my heart pounding. This was the part Diana couldn't have possibly known. This was the secret hidden inside the secret. First, you must understand that you are likely not alone. The development company, Apex, they are not just developers. They are a front for the same people your father owed money to. Their offer will be low, insulting. They are counting on you being young, desperate, and ignorant. They believe you will take the quick cash and run. Diana has likely told them as much. Do not speak to them. Not yet. You have no leverage. You must find your leverage first. The business card in my pocket felt like a scorpion. Apex Land Holdings. It wasn't just a company. It was the ghost of my father's mistakes. "I have hidden it all," the letter read. "Not in a bank. Banks leave a paper trail. I have converted everything over years into tangible, untraceable assets. They are here, with you, in the yard. You are standing on your inheritance. But to find it, you need to solve a riddle. I am sorry for the games, but I could not risk writing it down plainly. If this letter were ever found by the wrong people, it had to be meaningless to them. Only you, with a fresh eye, can see it." I leaned forward, my entire being focused on the next words. This was it, the key. "The heart of the dragon is where the sun never sets." That was it. That was the clue. The heart of the dragon is where the sun never sets. I read it again and again. It made no sense. A dragon? What dragon? I looked around the trailer, at the books, the tools. Nothing. It had to be outside, in the yard, in the glorious, terrifying 5-acre mess. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I tucked the envelope deep into the inside pocket of my jacket. It felt warm against my chest. a direct connection to a man I now felt I knew intimately. The grief was still there, a raw ache in my soul, but something else was there now too, a spark, a tiny, burning ember of purpose. He had trusted me. He had spent years building this strange, lonely kingdom, all on the faith that one day I would arrive and be smart enough and brave enough to understand. I would not let him down. I owed him that. I owed it to the little boy who had lost his grandfather, and to the old man who had given up everything. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. I walked to the door of the trailer and stepped back out into the yard. The sun was higher now, casting long, sharp shadows across the mountains of scrap. The yard no longer looked like a monument to decay. It looked like a puzzle, a 5-acre, 3-dimensional puzzle box. And I had the key. The heart of the dragon is where the sun never sets. I said the words aloud. They sounded strange and mythic in the quiet air. I had to think like him, a man who saw value where others saw junk, a man who saw systems in chaos, a dragon. I started to walk. I spent the next 2 hours walking the perimeter of the yard, my eyes scanning the colossal piles of metal. I was looking for a shape, a hint, anything that could be interpreted as a dragon. There were towers of crushed cars that looked like sleeping giants, tangles of rebar that resembled nests of metallic snakes, but no dragon. The sheer scale of the place was starting to defeat me. It was an impossible task. I was tired, hungry, and my initial surge of determination was beginning to fade, replaced by a creeping despair. Diana's voice echoed in my head. A worthless junkyard. Maybe she was right. Maybe my grandfather was just a crazy old man, and this was all a wild goose chase, a final, elaborate delusion. I sat down on the rusted hood of a pickup truck, its engine long since scavenged. I put my head in my hands. What was I even doing here? I was a kid with a box of clothes and a cryptic letter sitting in a field of garbage. The $5,000 from Apex felt suddenly, powerfully seductive. It was real. It was a bus ticket out of here, a clean room, a hot meal. All I had to do was make one phone call. But then I thought of the letter. I thought of the steady, loving script. I thought of the years of sacrifice, the profound loneliness he must have endured. He didn't do all of that for me to give up in 2 hours. He believed I could do this. I had to believe it too. I stood up. I had to be smarter, think differently. A dragon. It wouldn't be literal. It would be something only he would see as a dragon. What did he collect? Cars, machines, industrial equipment. I started walking again, but this time I wasn't just looking at the piles. I was looking at the individual pieces. I walked past rows of old farm equipment, combines and threshers, their metal teeth bared like prehistoric beasts. I passed a collection of vintage gas pumps, their glass faces cracked and cloudy. And then I saw it. It was a piece of machinery so large it dominated one whole section of the yard. It was an old earth mover, a colossal thing, a Bucyrus Erie dragline excavator from the 1950s maybe. Its long, latticed boom lay on the ground, stretching for at least 100 feet, like a neck. The massive shovel attachment, big enough to hold a car, sat beside it like a gaping maw. The main body of the machine, the housing for the engine and controls, was a huge rounded metal shell, covered in overlapping steel plates that looked, if you squinted, like scales. The long neck, the scaly body, the giant mouth. It was a dragon, a mechanical dragon, sleeping in a field of its own metallic conquests. My heart leaped. This had to be it. I ran toward it, my feet slipping on the uneven ground. I stood before the main housing, craning my neck to look up at it. It was a monster of a machine, the heart of the dragon. The heart would be the engine, the core of the machine. I found a rusted access panel on the side and tugged it open. Inside was a cavern of grease-caked machinery, a massive diesel engine, silent and still. It was dark and cramped. I searched for half an hour, my hands getting covered in thick black grime, but I found nothing. No hidden compartments, no loose panels, nothing. Dejected, I climbed out, wiping my hands on my jeans. I stood back and looked at the riddle again. The heart of the dragon is where the sun never sets. Where the sun never sets. What did that mean? The north side? A place in shadow? I walked around the entire machine. The sun was moving across the sky, and different parts fell into shadow as the day wore on. The clue didn't seem to point to a specific location based on light. I was missing something. I kicked at a loose piece of scrap metal in frustration. The sun never sets. It wasn't a literal observation about sunlight. It had to be a metaphor. Something that looked like a sun, but wasn't. A painted sun. I started examining the body of the machine again, not looking for shadows, but for markings. Most of it was covered in rust and faded, peeling paint. The original manufacturer's logos were long gone. But on the side of the main cab, low to the ground and partially obscured by a thick growth of weeds, was a splash of color. Yellow. I knelt and pulled the weeds away. It was a painted logo, a custom job, not original to the machine. It was a circle of bright, vibrant yellow, with rays coming off it, painted with a thick, glossy enamel that had resisted the decades of weather far better than the rest of the paint. It was a cartoon sun, a sun that never set because it was made of paint. My breath hitched. This was it. This was the spot. The heart of the dragon, the main body of the machine. Where the sun never sets, right here, beneath this painted sun. I looked at the ground below the logo. It was just dirt and gravel, packed hard over the years. There was no X marks the spot, but it had to be here. I went back to the tool pile and found what I was looking for. A heavy, pointed shovel and a pickaxe. The handles were weathered but strong. I carried them back to the dragon and took a stance. This was my choice. To trust the riddle, to trust him. I lifted the pickaxe and swung it down with all my might. It bit into the hard-packed earth with a satisfying thud. I was no longer just exploring. I was digging for my future. The ground was harder than I could have imagined. It was a compacted mix of clay, rock, and decades of metallic dust. The pickaxe rang with each strike, sending vibrations jarring up my arms. After a few minutes, I was sweating, my muscles screaming in protest. This was real work, the kind of work that left you sore and exhausted, the kind I'd never done in my life. But I didn't stop. With every swing, I thought of my grandfather. I imagined him here, working in this yard, his hands calloused, his body strong. I wasn't just digging in the dirt, I was connecting with him, with the life he had lived. I worked for what felt like hours. I lost track of time. The sun climbed higher, beating down on my back. I fell into a rhythm. Swing the pickaxe, break the earth. Shovel the loose dirt aside. Repeat. My hands blistered, then the blisters broke, but I kept going. The hole grew slowly. a foot deep, then 2. I was about to give up, to believe I was wrong again, when the shovel struck something that wasn't a rock. It made a dull, hollow thud, a metallic sound. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dropped the shovel and fell to my knees, digging frantically with my bare, bleeding hands. I clawed away the dirt and uncovered the corner of something. A box. A dark green metal box. It looked like an old military-grade strongbox. It was about 2 feet long and a foot wide. It was heavy. I cleared the dirt from around it and found the handles on the side. I braced myself and pulled. It was heavier than I could have imagined. I had to use my legs, straining until my vision swam, but I finally managed to heave it up and out of the hole. It sat on the ground beside the hole, solid and real. It was real. He hadn't been crazy. It was all real. The box was secured with 2 heavy latches, but no lock. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely work the clasps. With a final, loud snap, they came open. I paused, my hand hovering over the lid. This was the moment, the culmination of his life's work, his long, lonely sacrifice. I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. I think I expected to see stacks of cash. It's what you see in movies. But it wasn't cash. The box was filled to the brim with paper. It was divided into sections, each bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with twine. On top of the bundles was another envelope, just like the one I'd found in the trailer. It had my name on it. I opened it first. The letter inside was shorter than the last one. "Leo," it said, "if you found this, you are smarter than I even hoped. Congratulations. You have earned this. What is in this box is the heart of your inheritance. It is not cash. Cash is for fools. It is too easily spent, too easily stolen. This is better. This is a foundation." I began to unwrap the bundles. The first one contained bearer bonds. Stacks of them, issued decades ago, from companies I'd never heard of. They looked like ornate, old-fashioned money. The next bundle contained stock certificates, also for obscure but solid industrial and manufacturing companies. They were tangible proof of ownership in the building blocks of the world. Another bundle held deeds, not for land, but for mineral rights on several parcels of land out west. And in the final, largest bundle was a detailed inventory. It was a thick ledger, its pages filled with my grandfather's neat, precise script. It was a catalog of the junkyard. Every single major item was listed, along with its acquisition date, its technical specifications, and its estimated value. I scanned the pages, my mind reeling. The skeletons of cars were not just junk. They were chassis for rare classic cars, a 1937 Cord 812, a Hudson Hornet, a Delahaye. The piles of pipes were high-grade stainless steel and copper, worth a fortune at scrap prices, but worth even more to the right buyer. The old engine blocks were vintage Allison aircraft engines and marine diesels, sought after by collectors and restorers. This wasn't a junkyard. It was a meticulously curated private museum of industrial history, disguised as a scrap heap. He hadn't been a hoarder. He had been a visionary, a brilliant investor with an unconventional portfolio. The total value, even by my uneducated guess, was staggering. It wasn't $5,000. It was millions, a lifetime of shrewd, silent accumulation. I sat back on my heels, the strong box open before me, the evidence of my grandfather's secret genius laid bare. The scale of it was hard to comprehend. It was a fortune. But it was more than that. It was a legacy, a life's work, a puzzle that he had trusted me and only me to solve. I laughed, a loud, incredulous laugh that echoed across the silent yard. Then the laugh turned into a sob. I cried again, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was from a profound, overwhelming sense of gratitude and love for the man I had never known, but who had, in the most extraordinary way, saved my life. As I was trying to gather my thoughts, I heard a sound, a low rumble. It was the sound of a car engine coming down Crow's End Lane. My blood ran cold. I looked toward the gate. A sleek black sedan had pulled up just outside. A man in a dark suit got out. He looked at the gate, then at me, standing in the middle of the yard. He didn't look like a man who was used to waiting. He pulled out his phone. A moment later, I heard a faint buzzing sound from my jacket pocket. It was the business card. I had a cheap, disposable phone the group home had given me for emergencies, its number written on the back of the card for the developer. He was calling me. The ghost from my father's past had arrived at my gate. The pressure was on. I let the phone buzz in my pocket, my mind racing. My grandfather's words from the letter screamed in my head. Do not speak to them, not yet. You have no leverage. But my leverage was sitting right here, in an open strongbox at my feet. The man at the gate was still watching me, a predator waiting for its prey to make a mistake. I needed a guide. I needed help. My eyes fell on the last item in the strongbox, something I had overlooked in my initial shock. It was tucked into a side pocket of the box, a small, leather-bound address book. I flipped it open. On the first page, one entry was circled in red ink. Robert Hemlock, Esquire. Below the name was a phone number. A lawyer. My grandfather's lawyer. This was the man who had sent the official letter of transfer. The man who knew the whole story. I made a decision. I ignored the buzzing in my pocket. I closed the lid of the strongbox, latched it, and with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I hauled it toward the trailer. It was a struggle, but I managed to get it inside and shove it under the cot, out of sight. Then I walked back out, closing the trailer door behind me. I took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the gate, trying to project a confidence I did not feel. The man in the suit watched my approach. He had an air of expensive, predatory calm. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Leo Vance?" he called out as I got closer. His voice was smooth as oil. I just nodded, stopping a few feet from the fence. "I'm Mark Theron, from Apex Land Holdings," he said, extending a hand through the chain links as if to shake. I didn't take it. "Your stepmother, Diana, suggested I reach out. I understand you've inherited this property." He gestured vaguely at the yard, a look of distaste on his face. "We've had a standing offer on this parcel for some time. Frankly, it's a blight on the landscape, and we're prepared to do you a favor and take it off your hands." "I know about the offer," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. $5,000. He chuckled. "Yes, a generous offer, considering the county liens and the astronomical cleanup costs. It's more of a gesture of goodwill, really. A chance for you to get a fresh start. A young man like you don't want to be saddled with this." He was using the exact same language as Diana. They were working from the same script. "I'm considering my options," I said, echoing the non-committal phrases I'd heard adults use 1,000 times. Theron's smile tightened slightly. He wasn't used to being put off. "There's not much to consider, son. It's either our offer or you're left holding a bag full of debt. We can have the paperwork drawn up this afternoon. Cash in your hand by tomorrow." He was pushing, trying to rush me, counting on my desperation. But I had my grandfather's letter in my pocket and a strong box full of secrets hidden in the trailer. I wasn't desperate anymore. I was armed. "I'll think about it," I said. "I'll let you know." His eyes narrowed. The mask of friendly concern slipped, and I saw the cold, hard calculation underneath. He was reassessing me. I was no longer the simple, easy Mark he had expected. "Don't take too long," he said, his voice losing its manufactured warmth. "Offers like this don't stay on the table forever. The land market is volatile." It was a lie, and we both knew it. He turned without another word, got back into his black sedan, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. I stood there until the sound of his engine faded completely. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the gate for support, my whole body trembling from the confrontation. I had done it. I had faced the dragon, and I hadn't backed down. But this was just the beginning. I hurried back to the trailer, my cheap phone in my hand. I pulled out the leather address book and dialed the number for Robert Hemlock, Esquire. The phone rang 3 times, and then a calm, steady voice answered. "Hemlock?" "Hello," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "My name is Leo Vance. I think my grandfather, Arthur Vance, was your client." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was a thoughtful silence, not an impatient one. "Arthur's grandson," the voice said finally. There was a warmth in it now. "Yes, I've been expecting your call. I was beginning to worry. Are you at the property?" "Yes," I said. "I'm here. I found the letters, and the box." I heard a faint sigh of relief on the other end. "Good. That's very good. Arthur would be very proud. He had a great deal of faith in you." Hearing that from a stranger, from someone who had known him, made it real in a way nothing else had. Tears pricked my eyes again. "A man from a company called Apex Land Holdings just left," I said, getting straight to the point. "He offered me $5,000. I heard Hemlock chuckle, a dry, rustling sound. "Of course he did. Mark Theron, a persistent man. Listen to me, Leo. Do not, under any circumstances, sign anything or agree to anything they offer. They have no idea what's really on that land. Arthur made sure of that." "I saw the ledger," I said. "The cars, the metal. I don't even know what half of it is." "You will," Hemlock said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Arthur left very detailed notes. Think of that place as his life's work. He wasn't a junk man. He was a curator. And now, you are the director of the museum. The Apex Group wants the land for a logistics hub. That part is true. But they've been trying to get it for years, long before the hub was a plan. Their interest is older and more personal. They represent the last of your father's creditors." It confirmed everything, the whole elaborate, decades-long charade. "What do I do now?" I asked. The question felt huge, overwhelming. "For now, you do nothing," Hemlock said. "You sit tight. You are the legal owner. They cannot force you to sell. I have the trust documents Arthur set up. They are ironclad. In the morning, I am going to file a preliminary injunction against Apex for harassment. I'm also going to contact the county and settle the outstanding liens. The funds are waiting in an account Arthur established for this very purpose." He was taking control, a calm, pragmatic general directing the battle. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this fight. I had an ally. "Your grandfather's instructions for me were very clear," Hemlock continued. "My job is to protect you and to help you understand your inheritance. He left you with a choice, Leo, a very clear one. The assets in that box, combined with the land and its contents, represent a significant fortune. You could liquidate everything, sell the collection, sell the land to a legitimate buyer, not Apex, and walk away a very wealthy young man. You would never have to work another day in your life. The thought was dizzying, a life of ease. No more beige walls, no more hunger, no more fear. Or, Hemlock said, his voice dropping slightly, you can take the harder path. You can take on his life's work. You can learn the business. You can manage the collection. You can build something on the foundation he left for you. He didn't leave you a pile of money, Leo. He left you a kingdom. The question is, do you want to be its king? The choice hung in the air, echoing in the dusty trailer. Sell or build, cash out or carry on, the easy wrong or the harder right. I looked around the small space, at the books, the tools, the empty chair. I thought about the feeling of the pickaxe in my hands, the satisfaction of unearthing that box. I thought about the institutional grayness I had come from, the feeling of being a number, a case file, a problem to be managed. Selling felt like a betrayal. It felt like taking the love and sacrifice of my grandfather and reducing it to a number in a bank account. It felt like becoming the kind of person my father had been, the kind of person Diana was. Building, that was different. Building was work. It was a commitment. It was a future. I want to be its king, I said, the words feeling right and true in my mouth. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard Robert Hemlock say, his voice thick with emotion, I was hoping you'd say that. Arthur was hoping you'd say that. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Robert Hemlock was true to his word. The morning after our call, a courier arrived with a package for me. It contained a new phone, a laptop, and a debit card for the trust account my grandfather had set up. There was enough money in it to cover my immediate needs, and then some. The feeling of being able to buy groceries, new clothes, and work boots without anxiety was a freedom I had never known. It was dizzying. Hemlock handled the legal side with quiet efficiency. The injunction was filed, and Mark Theron's black sedan did not reappear at my gate. The county liens were paid off in full. Officially, the property was mine, free and clear. The real work, however, was just beginning. The yard was my new classroom, and my grandfather's ledger was my textbook. I started in one corner and began the monumental task of sorting, cleaning, and cataloging. I learned to identify different grades of steel, aluminum, and copper. I learned the difference between a flathead V8 and a straight 6. I spent my days hauling, organizing, and researching, and my nights in the trailer poring over the old engineering manuals from my grandfather's library. It was the hardest I had ever worked in my life. My body ached constantly. My hands were permanently calloused and stained with grease. But I had never felt more alive. I wasn't just cleaning up a mess. I was getting to know my grandfather. Every object told a story about him, his eye for quality, his patience, his encyclopedic knowledge. I found notes he'd tucked away inside engine blocks, little reminders to himself about a specific part or a particular quirk of a machine. It felt like a conversation across time. One afternoon, while I was trying to clear the vines off a row of old military surplus vehicles, a dusty pickup truck pulled up to the gate. I was wary at first, thinking it might be another one of Apex's goons. But the man who got out was old, with a weathered face and kind eyes. He wore greasy overalls and a faded baseball cap. "You must be Arthur's boy," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He introduced himself as George, the owner of the gas station and auto shop in Oakhaven. He'd known my grandfather for 40 years. "Arthur was a good man," George said, leaning against the fence. "Quiet, kept to himself. But he knew more about machines than any 10 men I've ever met. Folks around here thought he was just a crazy old junk man, but I knew better. He helped me out more times than I can count. Found me parts nobody else could find." Over the next few weeks, more people like George started to show up. A farmer whose family had known my grandfather for generations. A woman who ran the diner, who used to leave a hot meal by the gate for him on holidays. They brought stories. They brought memories. They filled in the missing pieces of the man I'd never known. They told me about his quiet acts of kindness, his fierce independence, his dry, subtle humor. They had respected him, even if they hadn't fully understood him. I was no longer an outsider, an anomaly. I was Arthur's grandson. I belonged. One evening, Hemlock called. "We've had a new offer on the property," he said. "A legitimate one. A consortium of classic car collectors got wind of the inventory. They're prepared to offer you a sum that would make Mark Theron's eyes water, just for the automotive collection alone." For a moment, I was tempted. The easy life called to me again, a siren song of rest and security. But then I looked out the trailer window at the yard, which was slowly, painstakingly, beginning to look less like chaos and more like a library. I saw the neat stacks of sorted metals, the cleared pathways, the classic car chassis I had carefully covered with tarps. This wasn't just a collection of valuable objects anymore. It was my work. It was my home. "No," I said to Hemlock, "it's not for sale." He didn't sound surprised. "Good," he said, "because I also have a call scheduled tomorrow with the director of the National Museum of Industrial Heritage. They might be interested in a long-term partnership." The possibilities were endless. A working museum, a restoration business, a specialized parts supplier, a foundation. It was a future, not just a fortune. A few months after I arrived, a letter came. It was forwarded by Hemlock. The envelope was expensive, the handwriting sharp and angular. It was from Diana. I almost threw it away. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It was short. "I was contacted by a lawyer," she wrote. "He informed me of the true nature of Arthur's estate. I have also been informed that Apex Land Holdings is under investigation for predatory acquisition practices. I do not understand why Arthur would go to such lengths. It seems unnecessarily dramatic. However, I am glad it worked out for you." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of her role, of her dismissiveness, just a cold, detached observation. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need her apology. I didn't need anything from her at all. Her world of sharp suits and sterile coffee shops was a million miles away from mine. My world was made of steel and oil and earth. It was real. I folded her letter and used it as kindling in the small wood stove I had fixed in the trailer. Watching it burn, I felt a final, quiet release. I was free. Not just from the system, but from the ghosts of my past. I had a new ghost now, a friendly one, who walked with me through the yard and taught me the language of machines. I had found my place. It wasn't a house with a white picket fence. It was a 5-acre kingdom of rust and memory, a place where forgotten things were given a second chance, just like me. This journey has taught me something profound. Home isn't a place you're given, it's a place you build. Sometimes you have to dig for it through hard-packed earth. Sometimes it's hidden in a place everyone else has written off as worthless. The greatest gifts don't always look like gifts. Sometimes, the most powerful love is disguised as absence, and the fiercest protection looks like abandonment. My grandfather didn't just leave me a junkyard. He left me a map, a mission, and a choice. He gave me the chance to build a life, not just inherit one. And that is a gift beyond any price. Standing here now, in the middle of what I once thought was the end of the road, I see that it was the beginning. The air smells of potential. The rust isn't decay, it's history. And the silence isn't empty, it's full of promise. Every day is hard work, but it's good work. It's my work. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am and where I belong. I am the king of the junkyard, and my reign has just begun. This story is for anyone who has ever been handed a mess and told it was their fault. It's for anyone who has ever felt like they were starting from less than zero. What I want you to take away from this is that your story is not over. The things that look like endings are so often just beginnings in disguise. The inheritance that looks like a burden might just be the foundation of your future. You have to be willing to look closer, to dig deeper, and to trust that you have the strength to build something meaningful, even from the scraps. If this story resonated with you, if it touched on something in your own life, please let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Have you ever been given something that seemed worthless but turned out to be a gift? What did it teach you about yourself? Your stories matter. They are part of the community we are building here, a place for people who understand that the most beautiful things are often found in the most broken places. Don't forget to subscribe and join us, because we all deserve a second chance, and we all deserve to find our kingdom, even if it's hidden in a junkyard.
Oh my God, Ellie. That's, yeah, what was that? Cat, what the? You have your coffee? Ooh, nice, my Manola. What kind of coffee do you usually drink? Legit Ebiqua. It's a stem I picked up from Date Everything. Oh, interesting. I still need to play that. I heard it was really good. And it has critically acclaimed voice actor Ben Starr in it, who I do admire greatly. Okay. There's quite a few voice actors I recognize. Yeah, like I think Ben Starr, Laura Bailey. Um, I think Laura Bailey was in it. I don't remember, but yeah, like that was a really good one. I have a Starbucks coffee at home. I have now caramel. Ooh, that's great, Manuela. That sounds really nice. Dino is admired greatly code for a massive infatuation for. Not in this scenario. Ben Star's just voiced a lot of characters that I love in a bunch of different franchises, like Final Fantasy, Clear Obscure. Oh no, he wasn't in Baldur's Gate, but yeah, so good.